Good afternoon. Today is the 15th of February and it's time for another not particularly interesting, probably quite boring and particularly vague vlog. Today we're actually not going to be talking about something that's as boring as usual, or at least I hope not. Some of you might still find it boring, and it's just this very, very simple phrase that I sometimes tell people. Never mentally have bought a car in your head before you see it. Now it's very tempting for us to go on the internet. Oh, quiet radio, there we go. That's better. So never have mentally bought a car in your head before you see it. It's ever so tempting for us. We have access to all these wonderful websites like eBay, Car and Classic, Auto Trader, to have actually thought that, oh yes, we definitely want this wonderful car that's the other end of the country and needs loads of work and it'll be really cheap and it will all go fine, before we've actually seen it. I cannot tell you how many examples I have of going to see a car for a client and it being totally unsuitable for them. Or in a case that I've heard talked about before on the channel a very, very long time ago actually, I think it was, gosh, it's November 2020 or something like that, about the Triumph that turned into a disaster. Yes, the $1,500 Might SE. I'll maybe talk about that a little bit in a while for those of you who haven't seen that video, and judging on the channel figures that I've had since that was released, I think possibly most of you haven't. So we will revisit that, but I can point to examples such as the Seat Ibiza that I went to see in a garage in Surrey, where the driver's seat had collapsed, the engine had no coolant in it, and the doors wouldn't shut at the back. There was the Nissan Primera that I was going to buy for myself, which turned out to be awful and probably worth less than half of what I was expecting to pay for it. I mean, these examples come up all the time, and if you think you're definitely going to buy something before you've actually seen it, or in some cases it's too far away, so you need to send somebody else independent to go and have a look at it, which is fine. I've done jobs for people like that myself before, but you need to get somebody independent to go and have a look at it, or have a look at it yourself. It's actually a really, really good idea generally to bring someone else with you when you go to view a car. It's a really, really good idea, even if they don't like cars. Sometimes I'll bring my lady wife with me to go and view a car, just because you've got a second opinion there, really. And before you kind of head on down this sort of track of thinking, oh, it'll all be okay, and it's not going to cost much to fix, just have a second opinion about it. I will constantly get opinions from Mr. Coleman, rubbish mechanic, before I buy, well, virtually anything. Even better if he comes with me to view stuff. I mean, that's even better, because he's far better mechanically on cars than I am. His name is a total misnomer. He's not a rubbish mechanic at all, actually. He's an extremely competent one, but it's funny. So it's nice to look at stuff and look at the prices of stuff and think, you can see yourself driving something like that. That looks interesting. The number of cars I've done that with in the past is incalculable. I'm sure most of you have too. But just don't get yourself into a situation that you put all your eggs in this basket and think, well, I'm definitely going to buy it. Whatever happens, I will buy it. Because it's just probably going to not go very well. It might be fine. I mean, that would be great if it is, but once you've checked it out, that's fine, and you've agreed a deal and anything like that. If you're just sitting there, in front of the computer and you know, from a distance, calling up the dealership and sort of, you know, putting social media and stuff of kind of, you know, like, oh, you know, I'm going to get this and all this sort of stuff. Just don't do that sort of thing. Don't tell loads of people about it. You've only got to tell them that you didn't buy it. So, you know, that's just really my advice. Take it or leave it. But I have an example of this, and it goes very, very far back into the past. In late 2005, I was working for a now defunct company that many of you will know called Phones for You. I worked as a junior sales consultant in Hampshire. Obviously the company's now long gone, so whether I talk about it or not is irrelevant particularly. So I was living at home with my mother, and my sister was sometimes there too, and I fancied a classic car. I've always wanted one, and you know, where I was at the age of, I think I was 22, and you know, I was not actually paying too much to be at home living with my mother. I didn't pay rent and things like that, and so I had some spare money. And on eBay, I found a 1980 Triumph Dolomite 1500 SE for about £750. So it was on an auction, but also it was a buy it now price. Back in the day, you know, classic cars for that sort of money were 10 a penny. You could pick up in a claim for £500 if you wanted to, for example. And you know, Capris were cheap, and just I'm not even sure that one of Mark II Escorts were particularly expensive back in those days. Maybe somebody in the comment section below could enlighten me about that. But it was in Scotland, and you know, it was a very good number plate. It was TSF33V, which I thought was a fantastic plate, original to the car, and it looked fantastic. Someone had given it this Sprint facelift. They'd put quad headlamps on it, and they put the Sprint alloys on it. It looked amazing for dark paint. The 1500 SE was a special edition introduced in 1979 and sold into 1980. And it looked like it had a bit of bubbling rust on the wing, but otherwise it looked okay. It had a restoration at some point. I think in the late 90s it had one. And I got in touch with the seller, and you know, we talked about it. And he had an 800 coupe as well, which was nice. At some point in my life, maybe I will own an 800 coupe, although they're very rare now, and you know, prices are quite high for those. And you know, he actually was a salesman of some description as well, as was I. Obviously, he was a fair bit older than me, so a bit more experienced in sort of stuff. And yeah, he said the car had an MOT, and yeah, it was basically okay. It wasn't too bad. And of course, the buy it now was only £750. I think we all started at like 500, but I got far too excited talking to him, way too excited, far too excited, and pissed to buy it now price, talking to him on the phone and saying, you know, we're sure it's okay and everything. So I then had to obviously transport this car down from Scotland to, well, Winchester, which is almost on the south coast, and it costs a lot of money. I think it was like £350, which, you know, compared with transportation costs these days, isn't actually that much money. To do that sort of thing these days would cost maybe £750. So, you know, it's not so much cost, and the car didn't cost that much anyway comparatively. But where I was on maybe 12 grand a year in my job or something like that, maybe a little bit more if I you know, got a bit of a commission, but not that much more really. It was sort of money. So turned up. I wasn't actually there. I was at work because I was working all the time, because that's what Phones for You used to do to people, and it was not good. My mother's friend, who actually owned the Miner, which her family had bought in '58. At the time he owned that Miner, he was there and he had a look at it, and he said, well, we've got some issues here. One of the headlamps doesn't work. The choke lever's not staying out. It's running like an absolute bag of rubbish. You know, the rust isn't actually that bad. It's bubbling on that wing, but you know, yeah, you're going to have to do some work on it, I think. So I came back. It was the middle of winter or something like that. I think it was maybe December. So I came back and I couldn't help myself. I wanted to go for a drive in the car. It was just sitting there in the dark, and so I got the key, the very kind of long Toledo Dolomite key that many of you will be familiar with the Leyland plug holders to despair on it, and I took it out for a little spin. I realised quite quickly that there were some issues, not just the headlamp not working and the bit of rust on that wing. The brakes were appalling. They were really scary, and I was going down this hill with the car cut out because the choke didn't work properly. You had to hold it with your hand when you came to a junction to make it run properly. Yeah, that was because I found out later on that one of the hoses had perished to the brakes, and so the servo wasn't working. Lovely in the dark in the winter. And I came back from my terrifying test drive. I didn't die, which I thought I might. I didn't actually die. Yeah, so I got it actually looked at by, I think, the RAC I just joined, unfortunately, and he managed to just get rid of the perished end of one of the brake hoses and refit it, which was fine. That was fine. Brake servo was working, so we actually had some brakes. So I took it down to the local garage that my mother always used to use for her cars, and they had it for some point, and they fixed a couple of things on it, including the I think the temperature gauge was a bit funny. I can't remember if it was working. It was broken, maybe. Maybe the fuel gauge was broken. I don't know. It's an old car, very old. And I just really realised that it just wasn't very practical. Like, you know, sometimes it failed to start. It wasn't very suitable for sort of high-speed cruising, really. You only have 4-speed, so there's no overdrive on it. So I had to get rid of it in the end, and unfortunately I managed to sell it for more than I'd paid for it, I think, because my photographs were a bit better, and I was in a more populated area of the country rather than being in, Scotland. And a nice chap from the Midlands came and picked it up, brought his family with him, and I never saw it again. Obviously, with the cost of transport and the cost of having to have some new tyres on the front of it, and the other things I'd had to fix, I lost money on it, but I got £900 for it, which I thought was sort of okay given the circumstances. But it's just a whole heap of unnecessary work, unnecessary fuss that I didn't need. I could have bought something a lot more local, which would have probably been a bit more suitable for me. It's fine to have a little toy you want to play around with. I mean, that's half the fun of having an old car, isn't it? But you do that. It's half the fun of it. But don't do what I did. Don't have mentally bought the car from the other side of the island that we live on without having somebody look at it for you, and maybe try to get something a little bit closer so that you can actually see it for yourself, and bring somebody with you to check it over. Anyway, I think that's my public service announcement over. Thank you ever so much indeed once again for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, leave a comment below, and we shall see you again soon for more unexpectedly informative videos. Lloyd Vehicle Consulting stickers, t-shirts and mugs are available by clicking the link to the Google form in the video description below.